Hi, everyone. I'm John, an EPS grad student. I'm really excited for this talk today, our first EPS Alumni Speaker Series talk of the spring semester. I hope everyone's first few days are going okay. We've organized these alumni talks, I think, with two big goals. One, to build community and connections across current and former students, just so we know who each other are. And two, to give current students a better picture of the possibilities and careers available to them and really practical steps for how people who have done it did it. So we're really excited to have Dr. Walensky here with us today to share her experiences. Bethany is the Associate Professor of International Education in the Department of Teacher Education at Michigan State, where she also leads education projects for the Tanzania Partnership Program. She holds a joint PhD in Curriculum and Instruction and EPS from UW, with specializations in early childhood and comparative ed. And before that, she was an elementary and preschool teacher. Dr. Lewinsky studies early childhood ed policy enactment in both the US and Tanzania, with a focus in three areas. First, how early childhood teachers and institutions enact and experience education policy. Second, how policy shapes teachers' preparation, work experiences, and well-being. And third, how global and national policy ideas circulate and intersect with local realities in the classroom. Her work has been funded by Spencer, and she's written in a variety of journals that we all read and look at. So we're really excited to have someone with her experience here to share some of her experiences. And I hope we'll all be thinking about questions we have. So when we get to the Q&A, we can get into a good discussion. So I think that's all from me. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Walensky.
Thanks, John, and thanks everyone for coming. I know, sounds like a snowy day early on in the semester, so I'm appreciative of you spending some of your Friday with me. And it's such a treat to be to see familiar faces and some new names and faces. So thanks so much, John, for inviting me, and to Michael for doing all the logistics and making it happen. So I'm going to be a bit casual today and informal. I don't have slides, but I thought I'd start by talking a little bit about my trajectory and, I guess what's brought me to where I am. And then I really would love to spend most of the time being able to have a conversation and answering questions that you all have. I was able to see the Google Doc with some of the ongoing questions, and then John also sent me a few prompts that I can address as well. So, John gave you, thank you for that introduction. So you have some sense of who I am as a scholar. I will say that to give you a little bit more background, what brought me to my work in Tanzania is that I was a primary school teacher there for 2 years, and that led me to an interest in international educational development. So after I came back to the US, I did a master's degree in international education development at Teachers College, where I first met the lovely Leslie Bartlett. Anyway, it's been so great to have the opportunity to work with her there and at Wisconsin in my final year. And while I was doing my master's, I was able to work with Leslie and Fran Vavris on projects in Tanzania and continue working in that space of maintaining connections. So I came to, when I first moved to Madison, I was actually, my husband was starting his PhD. And so I worked as the assistant director of a daycare for a year. And my husband wisely said, I think you should apply for a PhD because you're probably going to get pretty tired of being at a daycare. And so in January, I was like, oh, I better get accepted. I did hit that turning point. And so my interests really span curriculum and instruction and ed policy studies. So as a former teacher, I've taught in Tanzania and in the US. I'm really interested in what happens in classrooms, but I'm interested in what happens in classrooms as that work and teachers' daily experiences are embedded within these ecosystems, right? Kind of think about Bronfenbrenner's concentric circles. So what's happening in a classroom is not, it has to be considered from my perspective in terms of what's happening in a school building and what's happening in a district and a national context. So I'm interested in how policies shape daily experiences, particularly teachers' daily experiences in classrooms, and how that relates to broader policies and discourses at the district or building district, national, and global level. So doing a joint degree really helped me live in both of those spaces. And I kind of came in with a broad interest. I know from my experience with doctoral students at MSU, people sometimes feel nervous when they start a doctoral program and they don't know exactly what they want to study. And I always reassure them that part of the work of being a doctoral student is, marinating in new ideas, hearing new perspectives, and kind of figuring out where you're headed. So you don't have to have it all figured out in year one. And I'm a good example because I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in year one. And kind of over time, as I was engaged in classes and thought more about my previous experiences, I began to really locate my work in an interest in early childhood education policy. Initially in Tanzania. Tanzania was my main focus, but then in another twist of fate, I had kind of spent 3 years planning to do a dissertation in Tanzania. And then because of the way Fulbright was not working at that time and other complications, I ended up doing happy complications. I ended up doing my research in Wisconsin instead. And I had an opportunity to work on a project with Beth Grau. So that was really a unique opportunity to engage in a multi-year ethnographic study in the US. So be glad to talk more if anyone wants to hear about shifting your research site in, right before prelims, I think. I was pretty far along. And so it was not easy, but it did work. It worked out. And so I did a year-long ethnographic study of policy enactment in the introduction of a new universal pre-K policy in a metropolitan area in Wisconsin. And I studied the policy enactment across these 3 diverse spaces. And I think I'm an early adopter of comparative case study because it wasn't called comparative case study at the time, but I was trying to do this hybrid of Leslie and Fran Vavris's what was then vertical case study. So tracing how a policy moves across different levels and social locations. But I was interested also in how the policy played out in these 3 distinct classrooms. So I looked at an elementary school pre-K, let me get into my Wisconsin lingo. So in Wisconsin, it's 4K. I just can't say that in Michigan because everyone gets confused. So I was looking at 4K in a public elementary school building, a corporate childcare center, and a private nonprofit preschool, and looking at how the new policy intersected with teachers' work lives. And actually it was through Nancy, I see Nancy's here, her year-long ethnographic methods class, that I did a pilot of what I thought was going to be my dissertation research in Tanzania. But I did a pilot of that study in Wisconsin, and that really allowed me to then hit the ground running with my dissertation when I did it. And so from there, my position, I'd love to talk about the job market. Unfortunately, I feel like my position, my experience was very idiosyncratic because there was a position that opened at MSU where they were looking for someone specifically with experience in Tanzania who could lead education development activities in Tanzania. So as I read the job description, it kind of looked like it was written for me, someone who speaks Swahili and has curriculum experience and, all these things that I had done. So I think my position is unique because I got hired, even though I had done a US focused dissertation study, I was hired into this more comparative ed focused position because I had all this experience in Tanzania. And I had done pre-dissertation research in Tanzania and worked on a number of projects throughout my master's program and doctoral program. So my role at MSU is also kind of unique. And I'd be glad to also talk about, people have questions about what is it like to go from being a grad student to a faculty member. But my role, so I'm a regular tenure track faculty member at MSU in teacher education. But along with that, I have this university level kind of service component where I work on this Tanzania partnership program, which is an interdisciplinary sustainable development project that is run by MSU and partner institutions in Tanzania. And we do development work across a number of different sectors in 2 villages in Tanzania. So I've been working on that. I've been at MSU for 8 years now, and I've been part of TPP is the acronym for that whole time, where I collaborate with colleagues at Dar es Salaam University College of Education to work on teacher professional development. Right now, we're doing work around play-based learning. So there's this, I have a research agenda, which enabled me to get tenure, but I also have this development work that hasn't as consistently led to scholarly publications, but is really, a really generative space to work on. And I have, kind of a really unique opportunity to straddle those worlds, right? To kind of work in international development and also be kind of a regular research, faculty member. So I guess I could just say a few more things about where I've gone, since I've been at MSU. I'm trying to think of whether I missed, there was something else I wanted to say. I don't think so. So since coming to MSU, I started doing research. I've established a US and a Tanzania research agenda. And so in the US, in Michigan, when I moved to Michigan, I began doing research on Michigan's public pre-K policy, which is the program is called GSRP. So I've done several studies now looking at different aspects of the GSRP policy. I also wrote a book based off of my dissertation in my first couple years at MSU. And then even though that was not valued by my department, so I know EPS is a book department, but something, for any of you to think about as you think about jobs or as you're transitioning into faculty positions is what I hear at MSU is books are not valued by all departments. And then I also, because of my role in the Tanzania Partnership Program, have been able to kind of reestablish my research agenda in Tanzania. So I've done a few studies there. One was a project that looked at, followed a group of students. It looked at a policy change in initial preparation for pre-primary teachers, and I followed a group of students over 5 years through their teacher preparation program and then out into the workforce. And the other is a video cued ethnography that I'm still working on that looks at notions of quality in pre-primary education in Tanzania. So that work is an attempt to kind of push back on these universalizing ideas about early childhood quality and the development of measures that can be used across all contexts to say something about classroom quality. So I'd be happy to talk more about that too, if you guys have questions. But I think I'm going to stop there because I hate just going on and on, especially on Zoom, and I want to see what kinds of questions you all have, and maybe we can kind of have a conversation about this.
Hey everyone, feel free to either unmute yourself or post questions that you have in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, so Leslie asked, what advice do I have for getting research experience while you're a doctoral student? It's a good question. I was fortunate that I was able to work on a funded project for a couple of years, but I know not everyone has that opportunity. I guess I would say if you're able to, in the context of a class, so I took, I think it's still offered, Nancy's class where we designed and then piloted a project. And for me, that was just such a great learning opportunity to think about how you design a project and then actually carry it out. And I know we would practiced doing, I mean, I remember we went over to the WID and practiced participant observation, and we took field notes, and then we talked about, shared them with classmates. I remember working on interview protocols and then doing interviews and getting feedback on that. So I think if you have opportunities in a class or as part of a research group to do that, I think those are just, it's so valuable, because once my experience at least was when I was actually writing my dissertation, it was a bit of a solitary endeavor. And I think, I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but it felt like once I was in the dissertation, things were moving forward so quickly that I didn't have a lot of time to stop and reflect on things. So if you have an opportunity to do like a small pilot study, that would be great. And then I guess the other thing I would recommend is, I feel like I spent my time at Madison really pounding the pavement and trying to get to know a lot of faculty, in part because every year, and I'm sure many of you have, maybe things have changed, but I never knew where my funding was coming from the next year. And so I got to know people, and I think it was because I got to know Beth, and I was teaching one of the classes that she was in charge of, that I ended up, and I remember actually meeting with her about my own research to get her advice. And so I think through some of those conversations, then she got to know me and what I was interested in, and there was a lot of alignment. But I would say also there might be opportunities to either have an hourly position on someone's project, or if it's unfunded, to, I hate to say to volunteer, but sometimes that is the way to get experience. If you're TAing a lot and you don't have like a research assistantship.
This is John again. I don't want to talk too much, but since you brought up your dissertation writing process and you said it was sort of a solitary affair, but I'm wondering if you could think to that time and maybe some of the things you felt like you did that worked well from a writing standpoint with the dis, and some things, if maybe if you had another crack at it, you would change.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I would have tried to have a writing group, or at least kind of a critical friends group, where we created some accountability structures. I think for me, a couple of things unique to my situation. Part of it, okay, let me backtrack. So I think one thing that would have helped me, I don't think I really had a clear sense. I did an ethnography that was very open-ended. I don't think I really knew. I went into it trying to kind of see everything and know everything and understand everything. And I don't think I really had a great sense of how to do my analysis. And so I think having some kind of more refined questions might have been helpful. But then I also think there's a lot of value to going, having a more open-ended approach to your research. So in some ways, maybe it would have been a little easier to write the dissertation if I had been more focused. Ultimately, I ended up kind of reanalyzing my data when I wrote my book anyway. So the dissertation wasn't even it was kind of a work in progress, even when I defended it. I would also say that, I finished up my field work. I'm trying to remember timelines now. It must have been like the spring of 2013. And then I was writing in the starting to write in the summer and the fall, but then I was also on the job market in the fall. And being on the job market takes a lot of time. So if you have piles of ethnographic data to analyze and you're trying to be on the job market, I'll just say it's difficult. And if I could have done something differently, I would have tried to figure out how to do more get a good chunk of analysis done in the summer, so that I would have had a clearer idea in my job materials, kind of what a key finding from my dissertation was going to be. Right? Because as you're writing your cover letters, you want to be able to say something not about the topic of your dissertation, but what you're finding, about your analysis. And I I was still very muddled at that point about what my findings would be. And, and maybe it was just my process. I also had a baby in the middle of writing my dissertation, so it's not something I would highly recommend to everyone. And he didn't like to sleep, so that also made it a little bit more challenging. So all my visions of, working on my dissertation while my child slept peacefully next to me did not come to fruition. So I think in the end, there was a lot of just kind of trying to get it done, being exhausted and not having a lot of time for, not having a lot of expansive time to work on it. But I think, I've published a lot from my dissertation, since I didn't publish anything from my dissertation before I graduated, but I got a lot of mileage out of my dissertation. And so I was able to, once I was more well rested and a little bit less stressed out, I wrote a book from it, and I think I had 3 or 4 articles, or 3 articles in a book chapter or something like that. So, but I think I see doctoral students at MSU really having writing groups and maybe and establishing those before they're at the dissertation stage, which I think could have been really helpful for me too.
Hey, Bethany.
Hey, Nancy.
Thank you so much for coming and talking about this. I wanted to ask a question that's related to what you were just talking about, and asking if you could say a bit about, along the entire dissertation process, how and to what effect you made decisions about the direction you would go in. So, for example, you had really different directions you were considering as your initial dissertation topic. And then at various points in time, you made decisions about going in one direction versus another in the research itself, analytically, in terms of writing. And I was just wondering if you could kind of talk to folks about that, because I feel like that process of having kind of crossroads at different points and not being sure where they'll lead feels really, really difficult to manage. I'm just wondering if you could talk about what that was like.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Sure. Like I said, I think, my research question for my dissertation was something like, how do teachers in 3 diverse contexts experience and enact a new 4K policy? It was very broad. And so I don't think that I was, even when I was in the field, I did focus on teachers, right? So I think I did make an analytic decision to, within everything that's happening within the classroom, I'm interested in teachers. So that's going to be kind of where I focus my attention, or who I follow throughout the day. And then but I think as I was writing my dissertation, a couple things helped me focus. I remember searching, and I feel like I had conversations with Nancy about this, because Nancy was one of my advisors, where I was searching for a theory or something that was going to help me analyze my data. And it took me a while and I don't know that even in my dissertation I got there. But I think what I started doing was reading a lot about pre-K partnerships. So the way that this school district did 4K was through this community partnership model, where some of the pre-K classrooms are located, and the school district administers the program, and then some classrooms are located in school district buildings and other classrooms are located in community partner sites. And so I started reading literature about partnerships, and that kind of helped me focus on thinking about how what I was studying was an example of how a partnership plays out in practice. So that was one thing that helped me. The other thing I think that helped me focus was really saying, okay, again, of all the things I could talk about, if I'm focusing on teachers, I think at some point I just began doing kind of a brain dump about the 3 teachers, and I was just wrote everything I knew about those teachers. And I ended up, I think those were my main chapters in my dissertation. I had one chapter about each teacher or each site. And so that also helped me think about, okay, what I'm doing here is really saying, this policy is being implemented in a partnership. What does that mean? What do I know from, I should say that I did, so my research was in the schools, and I spent, like hundreds of hours in the field in classrooms. I interviewed teachers, but then I also did interviews. I went to school board meetings about 4K. I also interviewed school district officials, like people at the Department of Public Instruction. I interviewed administrators. So using the comparative case study approach, I was interested in, like, at these different levels of implementation, how are people making sense of the policy? So I had data on kind of how the policy was formed and the different perspectives and the political tensions that were part of the policy making. So I tried to think about on two levels, I guess. So what was happening as the policy came into being? How is this partnership imagined? What were the points of contention? And I used the literature, most of which was not scholarly. I think I had trouble finding, there wasn't a lot of scholarly literature about this area of pre-K or early childhood policy. So it was a little hard to kind of figure out where the lit review was situated, but I ended up thinking about partnerships, and then my dissertation ended up being about how does kind of seeing the partnership or experiencing the partnership through the lens of these teachers' experiences, and looking at what was it about their institution, their institutional context, and how it interacted with the policy that resulted in kind of a particular experience for that teacher, and what are the broader implications of that for thinking about how the policy could have been better, or could have, some of the unforeseen consequences could have been avoided. So I looked at things like how the policy led to the stratification of the pre-K teaching force, because pre-K teachers, or 4K teachers, no matter where they were teaching, whether it was in a private preschool, a daycare center, or an elementary school building, all had to have the same qualifications, but they were paid, they had dramatically different compensation, right? So it created this churn in pre-K that everyone who was teaching 4K in a childcare center wanted to get into the elementary school building because they could actually be somewhat more fairly compensated. So I think focusing on partnerships and focusing on kind of like how the teacher's institutional context shaped the way the policy affected their work experiences. Those things helped me kind of create an anchor point. And then honestly, I think it was in retrospect that I think sometimes we go into things, or sort of in hindsight, I think I realized, what I'm really interested in is how policies affect teachers, like the early childhood workforce. And I honestly think I didn't know that necessarily as I was writing my dissertation, which may sound, I don't know, surprising or crazy, but I think I kind of wrote my way into realizing what I was doing in some ways.
Thanks so much, Bethany. Well, I'll ask another quick one for those who are a little bit further along and thinking now about, you spoke a little bit about the process of job hunting while you were in the midst of writing. How about, after you got this job, what did you find were the pieces, looking back, what did you find were the pieces of graduate school that you think were most important for setting you up for success on this particular path?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. And I see there are a couple of questions on the chat that I can answer too.
My question for now then.
Well, I would say something that, I felt like I felt like I knew what I was getting myself into with a faculty position, but I also want to say the first couple of years were really challenging. And I think I had a lot of teaching experience. I would say that was really helpful. Like I felt really confident as a teacher. It's still a lot of work at the beginning, of course, with new preps, but I knew that I taught a lot at Wisconsin, so I knew that I could be successful teaching. So it was a lot of work, but I wasn't kind of nervous about doing that beyond the kind of normal nervousness that I still feel at the beginning of a semester. I think what I wasn't quite prepared for was really how to jumpstart. Like everyone talks about a publication pipeline, and I didn't. I felt like I was a little slow to start. Like I saw other people coming in, like me, who had already had a publication or two, and I think initially for me, I didn't really. I wasn't really sure how to get started on that. I did have. I think when I came in, I had already been talking to Teachers College Press about my book. So I think I wrote my book proposal the first summer. I started my position in January. So I defended I got the job in the spring, but then because my husband was still finishing his PhD, and honestly, we had a little baby. So I delayed my start until January. When I started, I was thinking about a book, but I didn't have any publications, like I said. And so it took me a little longer to figure that out. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat a little bit too. So I would say that, if I had to do it over again, I guess I would say if there are ways that you can have kind of explicit conversations with people who have, with your advisor, people who've recently started about like, just how did you do that? I think that would be really helpful. And I think how I did that, I think publishing the book was my first thing that I really worked on. And so I think once I got that out, I felt confident that I could, that I could publish something. And then I just started, I think there was one of my first articles was in a special issue of Ed Policy Analysis Archive. So that helped a little bit because I was able to focus my analysis based on, they put out a call and I said, oh, I think I could write, I think I have something that would fit here. And so that helped me focus my analysis for that article. And so I don't know that special issues are always, they can be challenging too, but I think that kind of helped me get started. It helped give me a focus. And then it was also just a matter of being brave enough to, kind of spend enough time on something that you think it's publishable, and not hold on to things for too long, until they have to be perfect, and kind of be able to take feedback in stride. The one thing I did do, I forget which semester, I think it was like my second year at MSU, I was able to do the new faculty boot camp through, does anyone know what it's called? The National Center for Faculty Diversity. National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. And I know, people may have different opinions on this, but I think so it's like a mentoring program you can do as a junior faculty member. And I think at that point, when I started, MSU was supporting assistant professors who wanted to do the boot camp. So MSU paid for it. And I think I wrote my book while I was doing that boot camp, because it creates an accountability structure where you're linked with, like, you're in a group with 4 other assistant professors or people at your level, and then you have a mentor. And so you regularly check in, and it helps you think about how to balance, all the different facets of your position. And I would say so that makes me think of the last thing I'll say about this question is, I think one of the things I was not prepared, or I hadn't thought about until I got into a faculty position, was that, you think you're busy as a graduate student and you have some sense of how busy and how many directions your advisor is pulled in, but I didn't know, how busy I was, or that I wasn't busy as a doctoral student, right? Like I had far less pulling me, even though I felt really busy. And even now I look at, if I think about Leslie, like her position as chair is very different than mine as just a regular faculty member, right? And so I think I didn't know at first how to balance the different, teaching, research, service, and then this large Tanzania thing that I'm involved in. And I think what I learned in the first couple of years is really how to manage my teaching, especially. You don't recommend being chair, Leslie?
Exactly.
Really, if you're at a research intensive institution, I would say, and I feel like this is heresy in my department because people are very focused on teaching, is you really have to manage your teaching and figure out how to get your teaching done so that you have room for the other things that you need to do, for research and publishing, that you're going to need to do in order to be successful. Okay, so let's see. So questions about the job market. What did putting together your job market materials look like? And then questions about how widely did I apply? Publishing, research. And then Emily's. Okay. The quick answer for Emily about how common is this type of center, I would say it's not common at all. Like it's kind of a unique position. I mean, unless Leslie, Nancy, or anyone else has seen something similar. It's a really unique project. It's also really difficult. So sometimes I feel like I got tenure in spite of this project because it's challenging. And I think I came in right out of grad school, and I think it would have been easier for someone who is at the associate or full level to go into that position. Having centers where you can affiliate is very common, and that's true. Like I'm affiliated. I think MSU is sort of similar to Wisconsin in some ways. Like there's an African Studies Center that I'm affiliated. There's a Center for Gender and Global Context that I'm affiliated with. And so there are, those create opportunities for networking and meeting colleagues and accessing resources and things. And so that's really a huge benefit of being at a big institution that has so many, strong area studies centers. For me in particular, that mattered a lot. So I did not apply very widely. My first year on the job market was actually, I was like, well, it was kind of a practice year because I knew my husband was still finishing his dissertation, and I applied for like 8 jobs. They were only in education departments. And I didn't apply for any actually that were comparative ed jobs because my dissertation was not, there are not a lot of comparative ed jobs. But I didn't apply for any that were comparative ed that year because my dissertation was not in Tanzania and I didn't think I would be competitive for them. I would say that when you're trying to figure out which jobs to apply for, and I guess Leslie or Nancy or Simone might want to jump in too with advice because you've been on more search committees than me, but there's this thing about fit, and sometimes it can be hard to decode job position descriptions and understand what a department is really looking for. And so I would, for early childhood positions, a lot of times they're looking for people who are in child development, right? And that's not the angle I come at early childhood from. So I would run things by Beth, by Nancy, by other people and say, like, does this sound like me? Like, you know more than I do. And I didn't apply for jobs that didn't, where someone said, no, they're not looking for the kind of thing that you do, right? Maybe there's a small chance that that they would hire you, but I guess I was very selective. I applied very selectively. I applied to, I think, 8 jobs. I had 3 Skype interviews and I had 1 campus visit, which was MSU. So, I didn't have any choices. I never thought I would move to Michigan, but here I am, and it's been a great position for me. How much should you be publishing off of your dissertation? And so I guess in response to what did the putting together your job market materials look like, I think I put together, honestly, John, I can't remember, but it's, I think having your CV is going to be kind of standard, right? So putting together your CV, getting feedback on it. I had multiple versions, a different cover letter for every institution to which I was applying. And I remember I got feedback on that from a range of people. I don't know if any of you remember Michael Foltz, but Michael Foltz read my cover letter because I just thought, I want to have different sets of eyes on this so that I can really refine it and make it good. But of course, I think what takes time in the job application process is really looking at the position description, the department, thinking about, you don't need to write a cover letter that says everything you've ever done, but how do you help them see, how do you tell a coherent story about who you are as a candidate so that after someone reads your cover letter, they can kind of say, oh, Tyler is a person who does this, and these are the experiences that they've had. And I can see how they might fit into our department, right? So, from being on search committees, I think sometimes there's a tendency to write a cover letter that kind of regurgitates your CV, but that's not, that's, I think, not necessarily going to be effective. You kind of have to tell a story about yourself as a scholar. And, and I would say that's what takes the most time in the job market process, is really thinking about, like, where do you connect with that position? What do you have? Who would you be as a colleague in that department? And what, where do you kind of complement things? Where do you, what do you add to the department? And then, and then also having a writing sample, right? So I think this is where maybe having a publication would be nice if you then can submit a publication. I think I had a book chapter, so I might have submitted a book chapter. I didn't have anything published from my dissertation, so I might have used, and I don't even know if I had a chapter of my dissertation written at that point, but that's where I think it would be really nice if you have an analysis chapter that you could submit, or something that's kind of helping the committee see where your dissertation is heading, and also helping them feel, if you're on the market in the year that you're applying for jobs, another thing you want to help them understand is that you're far enough along that you will finish your dissertation by the time you're expected to start the job, that you'll graduate by that time. And then, of course, figuring out who are going to be your letter writers, and asking them to write letters, and thinking about what is what's the constellation of letters that could be really helpful for different positions. And as someone who now writes letters for people and gets asked to write letters, I think helping your letter writers write good letters for you. So helping them understand, they're not spending as much time looking at the job description as you are. So helping them understand, what they can highlight for you, and what you think, how you see yourself in that position. Not just like, here's the job description, can you write me a letter? I'm sure you guys are all doing amazing work, but when people are, as busy as Leslie, it's nice to, you'll have the best letter possible if you can also give your letter writer some suggestions for what they can highlight. Publishing, how much should you be publishing off your dissertation or before your dissertation is complete? I mean, it's tricky, right? Because at least from my department, it feels like students are increasingly feeling pressure to publish, have multiple publications before they graduate. The challenge is that if you publish a lot from your dissertation before you graduate, then you have less that's going to start you off in a tenure track position. So at least at MSU, if I had only publications, things that I published since I started at MSU counted toward tenure. So if I had published a lot of things before I started at MSU, it wouldn't have, it might have helped me get the job, which would have been important, but it wouldn't have counted toward my tenure dossier. So I would say ideally, you want to have maybe something either from your dissertation or from another project you've been able to work on before you graduate. But then you want to kind of have things that are like almost ready to be submitted, or like you have a plan for what you're going to submit in your first couple of years in a tenure track position, so that that'll kind of get you, so you can hit the ground running, and so that those publications will count for toward tenure. And then another question is about research. Should comparative and international ed students focus on getting US-based experience or focus more on a specific project or area or context? Yeah, it's a really hard question because I do think that, the job market is there's so few opportunities in comparative ed that I do think it's helpful if you have some, can point to some experience in the US that's related to what your comparative ed project is. I do know for a fact that one of the things that was attractive about me for the MSU position is that I had US experience as well, because we're in a US focused teacher preparation program, and so the hiring committee liked the fact that I could teach, that I could be in both spaces. And actually, MSU, my department offers very few comparative ed classes, and so I do have to be able to teach undergraduate pre-service teachers. So I think to the extent that there's a way, so I have students who we've talked about doing a dissertation. I don't know if in EPS folks are doing 3 article dissertations, but we've talked about our students do a practicum project. They have to do it as one of their program milestones. So we've talked about doing a practicum project that's based in the US, that's similar to what the international project is going to be. And then one paper from the dissertation or a publication could be based on a similar issue in the US. And then you also have the dissertation that is based in, that's in Senegal or Uganda. So I do think it's smart, or to have kind of a disciplinary focus that makes sense in a US Department of Curriculum and Instruction, for example. So, math education, science education, and literacy. I know that, in our department, that's what we're kind of looking for. You're looking for people who can fit into kind of a couple areas. And so if you do have if you can kind of make sense in the US context, that is valued. And then I'm not sure, so the question about how important is the second project, Tyler, do you want to say something else about that?
Yeah, just when you're applying you have your dissertation, but then what you're going to do next, what's your next project? And should that be, if you're a comparative ed doing a, say in Malawi or something, should you try to make that into a US based or something like that kind of project?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think in my cover letters, there was a project that I sincerely that I proposed as the next step. It was in Tanzania. I can't remember. I mean, I know for the MSU position, I probably proposed something in the US. But remember, so I had done a US dissertation, so it kind of made sense for me to say, well, I did this work at, in Wisconsin. If I were hired at, Teachers College, then I would do a study of UPK in New York City, right? So that made sense. I would be careful about proposing something that seemed like a big jump, where people might say, wait, just because you did that in Malawi, how do you know you could do that in the US, right? So you're going to want to think carefully about what you're proposing. I also proposed, to do some study in Tanzania, which it was kind of a work of fiction, right? It was kind of like, what am I interested in? What would be logical? What can I say? based on things that I learned in my dissertation, here's what I can imagine are my next steps. And I kind of fleshed that idea out. I didn't end up doing it in practice because it didn't work out. Things changed. But I did have it. I think the important thing is that you can, you know, people can see the thread. It doesn't feel like something random. It feels like something that's building.
Well, Bethany, I'm gonna jump in then and just say thank you so much for joining us. Leslie had to take off, so I'm taking over her thanks role for just a second here. It's been such a joy to hear from you, and I really appreciate how you were able to speak to so many different phases of the project that students are trying to kind of think through and navigate right now. And also the fact that you're able to speak to both domestic and CIE approaches to the job market, I think is incredibly helpful. We're really grateful to you for the time and energy. It's no small thing when you're in the midst of 1,000 things on your end. So thank you for joining us so much. And I'm not going to speak for you, but if you're willing to have people contact you with follow-up questions, if you can let them know, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. No, it's so nice to be here, and these conversations are really important, and I think we all learn a lot from them. So I'm glad to be able to do it. Yeah, please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have questions. And you guys, you guys can feel free, John or Michael, please share my email address with folks if they want to. I'll also be at CIES and AERA this year, so if anyone wants to grab coffee and chat, that would be great too.
Thank you so much.